There are differences with President Trump.
There will be life after Donald Trump. Our problems didn't start just with Donald Trump. And say goodbye to Donald Trump.
It's just how dangerous Donald Trump is.
Not just to beat Donald Trump.
And now, President Trump, you can go back to watching Fox News.
That we must and will defeat Trump.
Not once have we talked about Donald Trump. That Donald Trump came into office, Donald Trump's Department of Justice, Donald Trump's administration, Donald Trump. If we don't get Donald Trump out of office.
And the fact that Donald Trump is undermining the limited protections that we have.
Racial divide started long before President Trump, that President Trump has made that divide.
We know Donald Trump's a racist.
Re-elect President Trump.
Any more than Trump can do things.
Well, do you think Trump is responsible for what happened?
Barack Obama was very different from Donald Trump. Donald Trump has a dark heart. You know why? Because I'm not afraid of Donald Trump on this issue.
There's one point we're really missing on the stage right now, which is the fact that Donald Trump's America First policy is actually an America isolated, an America alone policy.
President Trump promised to bring the troops home.
I am the only person up here to have voted against all three of Trump's military budgets.
You are a vegan since 2014. That's obviously a personal choice. But President Trump...
Because you've seen President Trump's tweets. What do you think about China? We've seen President Trump.
I remember President Trump scoffed and said he'd like to see me making a deal with Xi Jinping.
We need a partner on the issue of North Korea. But the bottom line is this. Donald Trump.
So Trump obviously hasn't a clue. Trump thinks that trade policy is a tweet. We're losing billions right now because of Trump's policy.
President Trump.
Donald Trump. Donald Trump. The Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
President Trump.
Trump.
Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Donald Trump's. Donald Trump's. Donald Trump. Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
President Trump. President Trump.
Donald Trump.
President Trump.
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 From Donald Trump. Donald Trump. Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
President Trump.
Trump's.
President Trump.
President Trump's. President Trump.
President Trump.
Donald Trump.
Trump. Trump. Trump.
Racism.
Their number one concern is racism. This nation are still raw from that racially motivated attack. Racial divide started long before President Trump and President Obama.
We need to root out racism.
Racism in America.
The real question isn't who is or isn't a racist.
We know Donald Trump's a racist, but when racism exists, the question isn't who isn't a racist. It's who is and isn't doing something about racism. They can't condemn white supremacy. We have systemic racism.
To re-elect President Trump is at best looking the other way on racism.
Racially biased. We have more African Americans under criminal supervision today attacking systemic racism, having the courage to call it out and having a plan to do something about it. If I am president of the United States, we will create an office in the White House to deal with the problem of white supremacy.
White supremacy is a growing threat.
Racism is dealt with in substantive plans, from criminal justice reform to the disparities in healthcare to even one that we don't talk about enough, which is the racism that we see in environmental injustice in communities of color all around this country.
Around race.
Systemic racism preceded this president, and even when we defeat him, it will be with us. That's why we need a systemic approach to dismantle it. It's not enough to just take a racist policy, replace it with a neutral one, and expect things will just get better on their own.
The first is just how dangerous Donald Trump is, the cost and the consequence of his presidency. A racism and violence that had long been a part of America was welcomed out into the open.
Their number one concern is racism. A racially motivated attack on Latinos in El Paso. The racial divide started.
Racism in America.
White supremacy is a growing threat. We need to root out racism.
We know Donald Trump's a racist, but they can't condemn white supremacy. We have systemic racism, racially biased, attacking systemic racism to deal with the problem of white supremacy. Racism is dealt with, which is the racism that we see
around race. To re-elect President Trump is at best looking the other way on racism.
Systemic racism.
Do you think that people who support President Trump and his immigration policies are racist?
Anyone who supports this is supporting racism.
Out racism, and I believe that we can
racially biased.
And people who look like my family. White supremacy is a growing threat.
As president of overtly racist policies, not 400 years ago, kids are not only struggling with racial segregation in housing.
You showed no interest in racial justice. Senator Booker, coming to you now. It was 65 years ago this year that the Supreme Court outlawed racial segregation in public schools.